in the 21st century. Hard-working people working hard for you and me. Moving higher, time and time again. Through the years you'll find us here. Moving higher.
Hello and welcome to Moving Iron Podcast. This is a special edition with Dawsontire and Wheel, one of the premier ag tire and wheel providers in North America, helping people grow. Dawsontire is a company I've done some business with pretty extensively for the last 10 or 12 years that I've been in this business, and they've been gracious enough to be part of the podcast. And on this edition, we have Cole Fredrick and John Elder, and Cole is the irrigation sales manager, and John is the sales manager for Dawsontire and Wheel. And we're going to talk about irrigation tracking solutions and different scenarios that we see out there when it comes to pivot irrigation. And guys, welcome to the show.
Hey Casey, thanks for having us.
Yeah, this is take two because something happened with my technology when we were going, and it just like quit, and I don't know what happened, and it erased everything I had. So, knock on wood, we get this one. So, fellas, I appreciate your patience, and we'll continue down the road here. So, Cole, let's talk a little bit about some of the options that are out there for irrigation tires and tracking solutions that you have, Dawsontire.
Will do. Thanks, Casey. Yeah, I'm Cole Fredrick, Irrigation Sales Manager here at Dawson. We're despite we're out here talking about irrigation traction control, despite the kind of the wet year that we had here in the Midwest and everything, it's still a pretty hot topic. But here at Dawson, we offer a handful of different options, starting with our Vortex brand, which is a Vortex bias tire, and that's going to be your kind of basic tire that you see out there. It's been around probably the longest, and it's one of the most tried and true there is. Then we also offer some airless options with the Rhino Gator, and then we also offer a radial and the trello board radial and the Vortex radial. And so those are kind of some of your basic options, which can go real in depth into talking about. Those are basically your bias ply, your airless, and then radials are kind of the ones you see coming out right now.
Okay, so I'm assuming that those three different options, bias, radial, and then the airless, is that a good, better, best option, or does it really depend on the scenario that you're in, what solution you use?
Yeah, it's definitely situational on what you want to do. I suppose you kind of have your better and best with your bias and your radial, and then you have your airless, which is going to be, I guess, very situational. It's going to be your certain fields that it really helps out. When it depends on what your number one issue. And I know John's always hitting, if you have a grower out there.
Yeah, I mean, if you ask the grower who's running center pivots, if you ask them what their issues are, almost always in the top five are going to be the tires. Something's going to come up without tracking, whether it's getting stuck, whether it's making ruts, whether it's getting flat tires. And it just seems that, each field is kind of different, just like anything else. If you got really wet, mucky ground, an airless option might not be your best solution because it's not going to give you the flotation that you need going across it, where that's where a radial tire would really, really shine. But if it's just normal ground, maybe a bias ply tire is just fine for what you need. So the key is actually, in my mind, Casey, is providing options to provide solutions, because it's really about making sure that thing can go around the field day in and day out.
Okay, so that's a good that's a good point. I want to ask you guys about that. So one of the big things out here in pivot irrigation land where we live at is when guys go back into plant or do their field work or whatever there could be 12 to 18 to 24 inch ruts depending on how tall your tire is and how much you had to irrigate and how much rain you got and all the different things that play into that. And there's a lot of field work that has to go back into fixing ruts and with pivot track closers and those kind of things. Is there any one of those options that is better for that, or is it just depend on soil type and how wet your year was and how much you had to irrigate?
Yeah, and it's kind of funny because I've been around the industry for a while, and one of the things you always hear about is kind of some of the keywords. People always talk about the variable rate stuff, and you have a variable rate nitrogen, variable rate planting, variable rate irrigation. And you talk about the field with all the variances through it. You know, on a pivot with tires, you really can't do any kind of variable rate. You know, it's the one, you got to find the one that fits all. And so that's where you talk about that. If you want, you know, I guess you would say maybe the top of the line that's going to really do the most good, you're going to talk about a radial, you know, a trellis board radial or a vortex radial. And that's going to be the thing that's really going to get you through the field. It's going to offer you probably the best traction. It's going to offer you the best rutting situation, because the thing with radial is you're only running that at about 15 to 18 psi, and so you're going to get yourself a much better footprint, better flotation, and that's going to help you to save the rest. So when it does come to harvest and you're going through there, 3 to 6 miles an hour, you're not going to hit that rut and jump out of the combine.
Right. Right. Yeah.
And then, and with that radial, you're also, I'm going to knock on wood here. I got one customer. He's been running radials for about 3 years now, and he says everything. He's like, take it with a grain of salt. He goes, but I'm not saying they won't get stuck. He goes, but I have never seen one get stuck. So, that's kind of saying something when you got a guy that's been out in the business for, 20, 30 years, and he's got some faith in something like that.
Yeah. No, that is saying quite a bit. So, I mean, flotation is you hear that word float around here more than I've seen in the past, right? I mean, we've kind of had the compaction thing that kind of popped up in the late 80s, early 90s with the introduction of Caterpillar when they rolled out their track systems, and that was a big thing for a while, and then it kind of fizzled out a little bit, and then now it's kind of starting to pop its head back up again. We start looking out at the future of these different solutions. Are you seeing anywhere where they're using like a wider track system or something like that, where there's a bigger footprint, maybe not necessarily so big that it's going to take out 4 or 5 plants and each time it goes around, out of each row or something like that? But have you seen anything like that, and is that starting to be something that's you could see on the horizon?
Yeah, so there's a whole lot of different solutions that are out there. There's some guys offering tracks. There's some that are offering extra wide tires. Kind of the thing with a pivot, unlike a tractor, the pivot doesn't really have a choice, right? The tires go where the tires go, and they're going to go to the same place every single time.
Yep.
I know Zomatic for a few years offered they called it a Z-Track, which was their track solution, but it never really caught on. They're pretty expensive, and they're only really good in very, really, really wet ground. And there's other ways to get across that that are probably cheaper and maybe a little easier long term. So I guess the biggest thing is, from a technology standpoint, is that we are starting to see, where the 11.224 was kind of the basic standard pivot tire. We're really seeing more movement into the 11.238, the 12.438s, getting taller, getting bigger. I mean, you look at the crop that's grown today, Casey. I remember when I was a kid walking through cornfields, if the corn was 6.5 feet tall, it was a pretty good crop. Now it's as tall as a tractor.
Yep.
So everything's getting bigger and better, and I think that goes along with the pivot tires. And I think, and Cole can correct me if I'm wrong, I think what we're seeing is more of a movement to the radial tire, much more like what we're seeing on tractors, getting bigger footprints, higher flotation, less ground pressure, creating fewer ruts is the biggest thing.
Yeah, I mean, that's 100%. You see it with the tractors, like you said, like you're running the radials because you want flotation. You get more surface area on the ground, you're going to get better traction, and you're also not going to be just pressure pointing single points throughout the field. Yeah,
that's the and we see the same thing in a lot of the farming operations that we have, where guys are, they might be going north to south and then east to west. You know what I mean? It just depends on what they're doing, how they're doing it, and So this is something I've always wondered, and this might be a dumb question here, but with the amount of no-till that we've seen over the last 15 years, 20 years, and how that's really kind of taken a hold. And then we're looking at like strip till situations and minimal till situations, those kind of things. How has that affected rutting in the field when you're looking at your irrigation systems?
You know, depending on different places you're going through, I was going to say, because you're talking about different situations with the strip till and everything, you also see, you know, it was kind of catching on there for a while, and I think it still is farmers are now farming in circles themselves. You know, they're driving the machine around and following the pivots.
Right.
So, you know, they're kind of trying to minimize even having to run with those issues. You see some guys, you know, they have to run so much, they might have even putting rocks in those pivot tracks, you know, they just know that's not going to be a productive piece of ground. So they're definitely making changes. And so since you're moving the strip till, the guys that are doing that and still going in rows, you see a lot more guys, I think, running towards that radial.
Yeah.
They're trying to get that more flotation on there.
I think anytime you add organic matter to the soil, right, you're changing what the cross section of the soil looks like. We're starting to see, you know, especially when, like last year when it was pretty wet all year, when they did have to run pivots, the soils get really mucky and really loose. And so if you're running, you know, where you probably have been running a bias ply tire for 10 years and never had a problem, now you change your cropping practices, you change your tillage practices and how you work the soil. You're starting to see, even in the same fields that may have been running for 10 or 15 years, you're starting to see guys that are now all of a sudden digging ruts. And you've got guys that are now all of a sudden getting pivots stuck. Likely because they're, you know, changing that soil profile.
Yeah.
By changing their cropping practices.
Yep. Okay, so that's a good point. That was my next question I was going to ask you guys. So let's talk about lifespan. And you know, every year, pivots go through a maintenance program, just like you would see in any other piece of equipment on the farm. What kind of maintenance and lifespan are you going to look at on pivot track tires?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of an interesting thing. You know, you talk about lifespan, and whenever you think about tires, you think about putting 50, 60,000 miles on a set of tires. You know, you're not exactly running 100 miles an hour with a pivot tire by any means. So, you know, that's the one thing. The biggest, you know, the biggest issue that pivot tires have is just the sun. I mean, they just get sun rot. They sit out there and they get beat by the sun. So if you get down, you know, places down in Texas and Kansas and South Texas where it gets hot, I mean, it gets really hot, and they just sit out there and beat in the sun all day, that's going to be your biggest decomposure to a tire.
Yeah, I'd say the biggest maintenance thing, Casey, is that people actually using a pressure gauge. You know, there's a lot of guys. I know we've talked before on these, and we talked about people using their finger as the gauge to see how much the tread wear.
Right.
But using an air pressure gauge is actually amazing for the life of the tire. There's so many guys that just go out there with a compressor and they just fill it up until it looks like it's full, and then go on to the next one. Well, you know, if you're talking about a radial tire and you're actually looking at 15 to 20 psi, and they go out there and they put air in it until it's not squatting like they think it should be. They may be up in the 45 or 50 psi range.
Yeah. So, what is the ideal psi? Is it truly a case by case scenario, or is there it needs to be 30 psi, or what is it?
I mean, that's just based on your tire that you're running. Like I said, the bias slide, they run around that 24 to 35 psi. I suppose most people put them in, and then, you know, like I said, the radial, you're running at 15 to 18 pounds is kind of the true market.
If it's on a corner arm, you might run it up to 25 or something like that.
Just because you got a little bit more weight. Honestly, the guys that are running it and the guys that have figured out how to use the pressure gauge, they're kind of, some of them really get into it and they kind of tinker around and they get their happy spot. You know, it might be that 17, it might be that 19. It's just kind of on the radials, it's wherever they want. But like I said, the radial, the big advantage is you want less PSI, so you get more surface area, whereas, you know, the bias, you have to keep that PSI higher just because they don't have the ratings, the weight ratings to be able to hold it.
They don't have the flex in the sidewalls.
Yeah. So from a maintenance perspective, you guys have trucks out running all over the place. You guys cover a wide span. You've got your store there in Gothenburg, and you cover a pretty good span there. You got your store up in Holly, Michigan.
Yep.
What kind of give me the range of what you're talking about when you say when you set up some of your maintenance programs you have for the different tires you have out there?
Yeah, so from an irrigation perspective, maintenance is actually really pretty easy. We don't do a lot of irrigation maintenance. A lot of that is done by our irrigation dealers that we partner with. So the Zematic dealers, the Valley dealers, the T&L, and the Reiki. Those guys really do most of the pivot maintenance. From our perspective, the biggest thing, like I said, is probably a spring kind of tune-up. When they go out and on a pivot, typically an irrigation dealer will go out. He's got a set checkup, a checklist of things, so to speak, to look at the pivot before it starts running. And one of those is the tire pressure, and making sure that the tires are aired up, that they're holding air. We talked a little bit about airless tires or flat-free solutions. We offer the Rhinogator as our flat-free solution, which is good in a lot of conditions, but in reality, if you get into really wet ground or mucky ground, there's not really a good airless solution out there. Your best solution is going to be a pneumatic tire in those situations. So it just kind of depends on the person. It depends on the situation. Pivots are kind of one of those things that they're the forgotten about soldier in the field.
Right.
Everybody talks about setting up their combine. Everybody talks about getting the maintenance on their tractors. We've talked in the past about tractors and the fact that the tires are one of the most expensive wear components on a tractor.
Yeah.
It's no different on a pivot. And it's one of the things that probably people forget about the most, and it probably causes them the most issues when they forget about it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I can imagine so. Definitely can imagine so. All right, guys. Well, I think we've covered the gambit here. Anything else you want to throw out there before we close it down on this topic?
No, I don't really know of anything, Casey. I think the biggest thing that we can say is use the tire pressure gauge. Make sure that you're keeping an eye on the tires when they do start to get weather checked and you start to see the cracks in the rubber. It's really time before the season, before the corn is 6 feet tall and it's 105 degrees and 100% humidity in the middle of the field.
Right.
That's really the time to start to look at getting a new set of pivot tires.
Yep.
Yeah, definitely the maintenance and definitely closed pivot tracks to help out. But I can't reiterate what John said enough. Like, trying to check them out before, because when it's in the middle of the season, it's the worst time. I've been there, trust me.
Yeah, I can't imagine that's any fun. I can't imagine that's any fun at all. All right, guys. Well, Cole Fredrick and John Elder, what's the best way to get a hold of Dawsontire and Will, and where's the best way to find them on the internet?
Dawsontireandwheel.com.
Yeah, Dawsontireandwheel.com. And
I think just click around there. You'll find all our numbers, our names, and you'll be able to get a hold of us. Call us, and we'll hopefully take care of all your needs.
Right on. Also, check them out on all their social media at Dawsontire and Will. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, all that stuff. Yeah. On what?
It's all out there.
All out there, yeah. So plenty of information. So, all right, guys. Well, I appreciate you being on the podcast.
Casey, we appreciate the opportunity. Thank you very much.
All right.
Have a good one, Casey. Thank you.
Thank you. So, this is Casey Seymour. Let's go out and miss some iron, folks. Out.
Moving higher in the 21st century. Hard work.